Right, okay, so I'm with Rick Priestley here, and we're talking about Tabletop Games, a Designers and Writers Handbook, which is this new book here out from Pen and Sword, written by Rick and John Lambshead. Now, the first question that begs to be asked is, why would you do such a thing?
Because John asked me to. John's got a mate who works for Pen and Sword,
oh, right.
and I think they were, having a conspiratorial beer one day, or 7, I suspect. And John probably said, I've always wanted to write this book, and I know somebody who'd be gullible enough to agree, and so thus it came about.
Okay. Right.
So it was John's idea really, but at the time I'd only just left Games Workshop, so I had a bit of time on my hands, and it seemed like a nice project just to get involved in, so I signed up for it.
So it's been quite a few years in development.
Oh yeah,
just after you finished Workshop.
Yeah, well it's been quite a long time at Pen and Sword being edited and put together, so, because being a proper grown-up publisher, not like us, they work quite a long way in advance, so it has actually been done for a good while. But I remember most of it. You'll be fine.
Oh, good. First of all, though, I think I should just check your credentials for anyone who doesn't know you. But if we look in the back of the book here, we can find that you're in the references. Your name appears fairly regularly. Priestley Rick, 1987, Warhammer 40k. 1983, Warhammer Fantasy Battles. But if we go back earlier than that, we've got Halliwell Richard and Priestley Rick, 1981, Reaper Fantasy Wargame Rules.
Is that second edition? That I think.
Is that really where it all began?
Not really. I think it began earlier than that. I would have been 22 in 1980, so I'd already been at college. The first thing Richard Halliwell and I published together as a set of rules was the first edition of Reaper, which was sometime in the 1970s. The reason I couldn't reference it in there is because I couldn't find a copy.
Oh, right.
And because I couldn't find a copy, I couldn't actually figure out when we wrote it.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was about 1978. So that would be the first thing I had published professionally. I say professionally because I put it together. I did the production on it, and then it was published by the Nottingham Model Soldier Shop.
And even in that early rule set, would we see some hint of your kind of traits that we're going to develop?
Well, knob gags. You're talking about knob gags, aren't you?
No,
you're talking about knob gags. You said you wouldn't talk about knob gags.
I'm not talking about that at all.
Yeah.
I'm talking more about things like, I don't know, maybe saving rolls or weapon skill or anything like that.
There's a kind of weapon skill equivalent because it's a semi-role-playing game. But it's actually a D100 based. Reaper's a D100 based system.
Oh, so very sort of role-play influence then.
And it uses an accumulated system for units. So if you've got 5 men fighting with 15% chance, that becomes a 5 times 15. Yeah, we were good at maths in those days. Sort of 75% chance of scoring a hit, so roll for a 75% chance. It was like that. Okay. If it went over 100, you'd get 1 auto hit and then roll for the. So it was always you're always rolling for the marginal numbers, which made it a little bit predictable, to put it mildly. But it worked. That's how it worked. It wasn't D6 based at all. D6 were regarded as old-fashioned in the late 70s, and early 80s. But we only did it for Warhammer because Brian Ansell spec'd it that way. And Brian Ansell spec'd it. He said, basically, I want this game designing so we can sell lots more toy soldiers. But it has to use D6s, and we hadn't used a game with D6s for years. I mean, we'd been designing games with D10s mostly, and D100s. So.
And was it a mass battle game? Was it a figure game? Was it a miniatures game?
Well, Reaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, mass battle game. It was fundamentally something like Warhammer. So sort of more like the original Warhammer in that you perhaps would have 40 or 50 models at the tops, and sometimes maybe 20 or 30. It wasn't, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. We had played those sorts of games too. We started playing fantasy games when Minifigs came out with their Mythical Earth range, which was 72, 3, somewhere around there. I may be wrong, but I think it's about then.
Okay. So we've checked out your credentials. We know you go back to the dawn.
I'm old. If the objective there was to establish how old, yes.
That you're old and you've done that, thank you.
Yes.
How about John? And what's his, I mean, you said it was his idea to do the thing in the first place.
Yeah.
What and how did you two come together, and how does the book work? How did you work it out together?
I can't remember how I met John, but he wrote The Fall of the West for Warhammer Age and Battles. Mm-hmm. So we've probably been in communication since then.
And he's written for Warlord as well, hasn't he?
He's since written for Warlord. He kind of is a bit of he's 40k fan as well. He's come through all that. He used to work for Games Workshop years ago, although it was years ago, and I never met him. Mm-hmm. He's always been interested in games. He's designed computer games at one time in the early days, but he's professionally he was a statistician working for the British Museum.
Okay. And how did it work, the two of you together on the book? Did he write a bit, you write a bit, or?
Yeah. We divided it up. He wrote. We just. So these are the sort of subjects we'd like to write about. And I picked some and he picked some, and we wrote half each. And then we swapped. And then he kind of peer reviewed mine, and I peer reviewed his. And then we he basically said, well, it has to have one voice. So can I edit it together so that it reads reasonably as if one person had written it rather than two different people, which I did. But I didn't have to change much. I mean, John writes in a very similar kind of colloquial vein that I do. He uses some bigger words.
You talk a bit in the book about how when you've been writing for as long as you have, the things that you've actually written here, and they come sort of naturally to you, really. Anyway, so if you were writing a game now, you wouldn't use your own book almost, really. You would do it all from instinct almost.
Yeah, well, you just do, don't you? If you do something for long enough, you actually get to be unconsciously competent at it, don't you?
Yeah. But if you weren't in the position that you're in, I've been writing rules since the beginning of time, do you think you could take this book and successfully write your own set of rules and become a multimillionaire like you have just by following these?
Is that how I did it?
Yeah. Just by following everything written in your book?
No, because that's not the objective of it. The objective of that is to make you think about the process, because the principle isn't here's a recipe for designing a successful game. The principle there is to write a successful game, you have to make these kind of decisions and think about these kind of things. And exactly how you approach it will be up to you. So there's no recipe. You have to do things which you're good at. You have to recognise things which are necessary in games design, but which you might not be good at. So it actually talks in there a little bit about the differences between games design and writing a game, because although they tend to, I do both, but a lot of people can't do both. A lot of people think they can design fantastic games, but they can't necessarily write or present them. Well, find someone who can. Work together. And some people can't work together because they don't like it. So there's no recipe. You have to do your own thing. And the objective of that book really was to go, well, these are the things you have to think about. This is what I've discovered during my experiences. Take it for as you will. These are the elements that you'll have to address. Address them as you will. And it's really a discussion. It's a discussion about the process of design, and an exposition of it. It's not a recipe or a guide to designing great games. Because name two great games, they're totally different. You know, there's no recipe. They have to be playable.
Yeah. Okay. And you also talk about that they've got to be well presented these days as well. Does that mean if you can't present your game well in the way that Warlord Games can or Battlefront can or whatever, does that mean it's not worth bothering?
It depends what your objective is, and I do say this as well. If your objective is to have some fun designing games for you and your friends, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you write them in crayon. You know, do what you like. Make rough notes. You and your mates will know what they mean. If you don't, you'll find out very quickly. You can design games without any pretension to publication or to presenting them in a way in which other people can read them. But a lot of people will take a step further and go, well, my ambition is to see this realised in publication. And even then you can go, well, all right, I'm going to publish it, but I'm not going to make any concessions to photography and glossiness, and it's all been slick. Let's do something cheap that people can knock out. You do that if you like. You just won't get a very big audience. You'll get a little loyal audience, and maybe that audience will grow. If it's really a great game, it might grow to the point whereby you feel obliged to then represent the game. Sometimes that's how it works. But if you want to actually publish and sell enough to cover your costs, maybe even make some money, then you've got to make it something people are going to pick up and buy.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to pick up on, 3 principles, so you don't have to bother buying the book, because we can just discuss it here.
Yes, I could read it actually. I could do it as an audio.
Yeah, it's only taken 7 hours. In the chapter 7, English as She Is Writ, you talk about the 3 principles, which are clarity, brevity and respect. Just tell us a bit more about what those 3 principles are.
Yeah, what they are 3 things which I've always felt to be important in designing and writing games, in how you present it. And they're not necessarily, as I said before, it's not necessarily a do it this way, do it that way. They're just 3 things you have to think about. I kind of developed this notion when I was at Games Workshop and I was talking to the other games designers, because they were forever trying to say, but how do you do this, Rick, and how do you do that? And I go, I don't know. It's like, I just do it. How do you explain it? It's and I kind of thought about it because they asked me to do presentations to young up-and-coming games designers. And this is one of the things I did. One of my presentations was basically clarity, brevity and respect. And I said, whatever you do, these 3 things are important. Brevity is itself a virtue. The shorter you can write the rule, the better. Any too much text will actually cloud the meaning, and if you can say it in a short way, you've got the rule logic coherent and right. So it's better that way. Rather than somebody having a book that thick to read to get all the rules, a few pages is better. Clarity is write clearly, but often in rule writing, clarity means going, if this, then that, but not this. You often have to explain a lot to get something clear. To make it clear, you often have to give examples. You have to repeat yourself. You have to say where all the exceptions are. And then respect is, remember, the poor sod who's reading this is human. He's not necessarily inside your head, and he's not a robot. So you don't write in a way in which is difficult to understand. Just say it like it is. If you can use a bit of humour to lighten a situation or make something memorable, that's great. But it's not all about gags. It's about having a clear idea of who it is you're speaking to, what your audience is. Okay. Now the interesting thing about those 3 things is they all fight against each other. So if you want something really clear, you often have to write at length, i.e. it's not brief. And sometimes writing at length means the poor sod of reading it, what's all this about? So, and similarly, if you want something to be really brief, it can often be so brief it's not at all clear. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Is that long? I don't know. And similarly, it goes the other way as well. If you're trying to be respectful to the reader, sometimes you still have to go on a bit to be clear or repeat yourself. So that's the principle of those 3 things anyway, and it is explained a little bit more coherently in the book.
It is indeed. That, along with lots of other things, including things like semicolon use and
yes, evil. Stamp them out.
Everything from the bottom up and top down. So that's Tabletop Games, a Designers and Writers Handbook, and it's available now from Pen and Sword.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. So it's who's selling it for the usual reduced price as well. Swines that they are.
It'll be everywhere.
They tried to sell it to me.
Oh my God! It'll be everywhere, but it should be on your bookshelf as well. So there you are. Thanks very much, Rick.
Thank you very much, Dan.
All right.